course, a big welcome to our colleague in the house when we're there, Miss May from the wonderful riding of Saanich Gulf Islands. And of course, Mr. Zimmer, who's in the actual committee room. And wish we could be all doing that, but I'll take doing it from home any day over having come to Ottawa. I'd now like to call the meeting to order. Of course, welcome to meeting number 22 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to the Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on October 19th, 2020, the committee is meeting on its study of the state of the Pacific salmon. Of course, there are lots of guidelines for us to follow, and I'm not going, we all know it from the public health authorities, what we're supposed to do, whether we're in person or whether we're in contact with anyone else. So I'll skip along now and just say that as chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. For those participating virtually, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. With the latest Zoom version, you may now speak in the language of your choice without the need to select the corresponding language channel. You will also notice that the platform's raise hand feature is now in a more easily accessed location on the main toolbar should you wish to speak or alert the chair. For members speaking in person, proceed as you usually would from the whole committee when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officer. As a reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed to the chair. When you're not speaking, it is very important for you to have your mic on mute. I would now like, of course, to welcome our witnesses here today. From the British Columbia Institute of Technology, we have Mr. Rosenau, Doctor of Philosophy, Biological Sciences. From Living Oceans Society, we have Karen Riston, Executive Director. And from the Pacific Salmon Foundation, we have Emiliano DeSico. If I butchered that, I apologize. From the Fish, he's a fish health researcher. So remind the witnesses that you have up to 5 minutes for your presentation. We'll now go to Mr. Rosenau first, and I will be fairly strict on the time as we want to get to questionings as well, of course. So when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Marvin Rosenau, and I'm honored today to talk to you. My background in fisheries work goes back 40 years locally, nationally, and overseas, within and outside of governments, including academic and scientific venues, as well as in management policy and in the courts. I'm now an educator with the Fish, Wildlife, and Recreation program at the British Columbia Institute of Technology, and I specifically concentrate on fish and aquatic sciences. My personal view is that the current salmon collapses that have occurred in southwestern BC and the Fraser River have largely been driven by impacts associated with fish farms. However, with the recent announcement of 19 farms being removed from the Discovery Islands smolt out migration routes, along with the decommissioning of the Broughton Archipelago fish farms several years ago, the DFO is moving in the right direction, and I praise Minister Jordan and the Standing Committee and others for making these bold moves. But today I will focus on habitat destruction and the failure of DFO to address this issue, and that's my theme. Species and ecosystems cannot survive and thrive without properly functioning habitats. Thus, I pose the following questions. Are there sufficient and appropriate rules in place in Canada to protect these salmon stocks and species in BC from habitat damage, example through the Canada Fisheries Act? And number two, are the existing rules being implemented properly, either at the referral and approval stages for new projects where potentially deleterious impacts might occur, or where random violations might take place and fisheries officers need to initiate an investigation and the triage decision folks need to go forward with charges or directed remediation? So it's my position that, notwithstanding the recent upgrades of the Canada Fisheries Act, via Bill C-68, which was very good. In my experience over the last 30 years using the Act, there is no reason to believe that there hasn't been sufficiently good legislation, regulations, and policy to protect fish and fish habitat. However, the implementation of these rules has sometimes been woefully inadequate, and this can be due to a lack of will in the internal DFO decision-making process, sometimes due to a lack of failure in understanding what constitutes destruction of fish habitat, and there's often a failure in regards to how to restore or mitigate damage. And staffing capacity of DFO habitat protection in British Columbia continues to be a major issue. The loss of the Prince George DFO Habitat Office and some of the closures in Quesnel, Clearwater, and Eastern BC offices exemplify this problem. So in my opinion, having worked on this issue for many years, habitat protection is the most difficult part of fisheries management, and to do it properly always requires a lot of work and tough decisions. If they're doing their jobs properly, agency habitat decision makers have to constantly say to developers, farmers, loggers, miners, or the hydroelectric industry, no, you can't do that, and that rarely occurs. The capitulation to proponents becomes the norm due to pressure both within and outside of government. Roberts Bank, Terminal 2 in the Fraser Estuary, and the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project are current examples of this scenario. Habitat protection and enforcement staff and the Fish and Fish Habitat Protection Program, FFHPP, decision makers in DFO often feel personally and professionally vulnerable to criticism if they try to do the right thing and protect habitat. My observations and my own personal history is that superiors often come down hard on employees that try to take legally and scientifically defendable positions. As an example, there has been a spectacular failure to protect large amounts of salmon habitat in recent years regarding the removal of floodland forests in order to develop farmland in the areas between Mission and Hope on the lower Fraser River in BC. And I think you might have some figures to see. In my opinion, many of these activities in what we refer to as the heart of the Fraser have been clear violations of habitat provisions of the Canada Fisheries Act. However, DFO has not charged any landowners under the Act that I'm aware of, and up to 1,000 hectares of prime Fraser River juvenile salmon rearing habitat has been or will be lost because of inadequate enforcement or bad triage decision-making in the FFHPP. DFO has failed to properly interpret the science and or the law and or have simply refused to enforce DFO's own rules in this instance. And this is just one example. So in conclusion, Canada has lots of good rules for salmon that are adequate to protect fish and habitat, but the government needs to concentrate on applying its existing powers and not politically interfering with, but supporting in terms of increased capacity to line staff in the various ways that I've just discussed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was pretty well dead on for the time allotted. We'll now go to Ms. Riston for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if we might consider reversing the order here. I have had the opportunity to discuss Dr. DeCicco's evidence with him briefly, and mine will make more sense after his.
Okay, thank you. I'll do that. So, Mr. DeCicco, you can go for your 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all the members of the committee for inviting me here. It's a big honor for me to be here today, attend this session. I've been told to say my statement is going to take 50 minutes, 50 seconds, so hopefully I'll be able to say it all. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Emiliano DeCicco. I'm a doctor of veterinary medicine, and I have a PhD in fish pathology. I work in this field for over 15 years and the past 6 years in British Columbia. In 2015, I was hired as a fish pathologist and project manager for the Strategic Salmon Health Initiative, also known as SSHI. The primary object was to assess the contribution of pathogens and diseases to the decline of Pacific salmon. We have evaluated more than 50 infective agents across 30,000 salmon samples over the last decade as the basis of the most comprehensive investigation of infection and diseases ever undertaken in wild salmon. We have identified several infective agents that appear to impact the health of salmon in the wild, with effect that can be as great as the well-known effect of sea surface temperature. Just to give you a few examples, we found that Piscine ortoriovirus, also known as PRV, is associated with condition and survival in Chinook and coho salmon. This virus, introduced to BC from the Atlantic Ocean about 30 years ago, is also prevalent in salmon farms. This is an important aspect to keep in mind because viruses carry the potential to rapidly evolve. And just like the current situation with the coronavirus, the availability of a high number of hosts favor viral replication and facilitate the development of more dangerous variants. As a pathologist working in the SSHI, I led the two main studies on the effect of PRV infection in British Columbia. The first study identified the disease heart and skeletal muscle inflammation, also called as HSMI, in farm Atlantic salmon in BC associated with the PRV. And considering the weight of evidence worldwide indicated that PRV causes HSMI in Atlantic salmon, we therefore recommend PRV to be treated as a pathogenic agent regulated under the Fisheries Act. In the second study, we found that the PRV can also induce a related disease in Chinook salmon called jaundice anemia. This disease has also been described in Chilean coho, and our wild salmon carrying high abundance of PRV developed similar pathology to what we described on farms. Finally, BC salmon sample within 30 kilometers of salmon farm showed the highest rate of infection by PRV. A similar situation has been revealed for another bacterium called Tenacibaculum maritimum that appeared to be responsible for significant mortality on salmon farms and likely play a role in the health and survivorship of sockeye salmon, Chinook, and coho. Importantly, this bacterium has been found to be abundant in the water around active salmon farms during outbreaks. And the risk of infection in Fraser River sockeye salmon is highest as they pass by farms in the Discovery Island. One of the 15 salmon viruses newly discovered by our team is the nidovirus, related to coronaviruses that infect gills, the respiratory tissue of salmon. We see this virus most commonly in fish released by our federal hatcheries. Preliminary results indicate that this virus may play an important role in the survival of juvenile salmon upon entering the marine environment. However, there are some agents that impact the survival of wild salmon that are naturally present in their ecosystem. An example is a small skin parasites that cause white spot disease in juvenile Pacific salmon in freshwater and appears to have a significant carryover effect on ocean survival. The agents I just mentioned are not the only one posing a risk to our wild salmon, but they are among the most significant and consistent across species. I'm recommending management action. In recommending management action, we can only mitigate factors that we can control, most of which will be anthropogenic. When it comes to diseases in salmon, the main lever we can control is culture fish, including salmon farms and hatcheries. We have the power to control when and how cultured salmon are grown, their abundance relative to wild salmon, and we can regulate the type and level of infection that will be tolerated. In this context, a close containment system for salmon farms is strongly recommended. Furthermore, there is a risk associated with hatcheries releasing large number of Pacific salmon, which may not only compete for a dwindling food supply with wild salmon, but could represent an additional source of transmission and evolution of diseases. Therefore, a proactive monitoring and regulation of the health and condition of hatchery fish before release into the ocean is essential. All testing should be available publicly to provide confidence in our management system. My last remark, I would like to say that the expression of diseases associated with the pathogens is often triggered by environmental conditions that the fish experience. We should expect that diseases will increase in frequency and impact as the climate situation worsens. The cumulative impact of stress and disease are likely not simply additive, and there is no doubt that the direct and indirect effect of climate change are impacting survival of salmon in freshwater, estuaries, and in the ocean. This is why rapid action to deal with fish pathogens and diseases is not only recommended, but necessary. We have no time to waste, and we need mitigation and restoration now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. DeSico. That was just a little bit over, not much at all. We'll now go back to Ms. Riston for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I was first invited to speak to the committee, I was going to speak to you about sea lice because it's a subject on which I've published rather extensively. But I expect you've heard quite a bit about them by now, and there's something entirely new that I wanted to talk to you about instead today. Dr. DeCicco touched on it. It's a new study that's come out of the SSHI dealing with a bacterium called Tenacibaculum. And because that is a mouthful for late on a Friday afternoon, I am going to henceforth refer to it by the disease it causes, which is mouth rot, if you'll forgive me for being a little unscientific about that. What I wanted to talk to you about mouth rot is the significance of the finding. You'll all be familiar with the Cohen Commission's failure to be able to find what Justice Cohen referred to as the smoking gun. I think we may have found it. This bacterium has been determined, first of all, to infect wild juvenile salmon, and to have, in the words of the SSHI, population level impacts. This is what we were looking for all along in terms of being able to quantify the risk to sockeye salmon, to the Fraser River sockeye salmon in particular. What's even more important about the findings was that the SSHI was able to spatially determine where this was taking place. So by testing actual samples of wild fish along their migration route, they were able to determine that the infections were occurring within the Discovery Islands region, that the bacterium was present on the salmon farms there, and that survival was being impaired to the extent of 87.9% of migrating sockeye. So that's a very important bit of information, and it directly contradicts the conclusions of the one of the 9 risk assessments that the Department of Fisheries and Oceans conducted to inform the minister about her decision on the Discovery Islands. And I want to spend a second to take you back through that risk assessment for mouth rot, because it's important to see what happened there. The department concluded that there was a high risk of an outbreak, that it was very likely this disease would break out on a salmon farm, that it was also very likely that juvenile salmon would be exposed to the disease, to the organism. What they didn't know, they concluded was highly uncertain, was whether or not sockeye could become infected as a result of exposure. Not knowing this, they went on to decide that neither the abundance nor the diversity of Fraser River sockeye would be impacted beyond a negligible extent. All of those conclusions are now proven wrong. First of all, the likelihood of infection is a certainty of infection. Secondly, the likelihood of, the severity of the impacts, no one would call 87.9% a negligible impact. This is one example of how tenuous the DFO risk assessments are. The science to underpin them simply has not been done. Here we have it done, and the risk assessment goes out the window. The next important point is what happened when once this information was sent up the chain of command in DFO, or more precisely, what didn't happen. Dr. Miller-Saunders tried to advise senior management, did advise senior management on December 15th, 2021, just before the minister's decision was to be made, that she had new modeling results, new evidence that was highly germane to the decision to be made. When the committee members do ultimately get my written documents, you'll see that I've copied into them verbatim from an ATIP result that we got searching for the correspondence around the communication of this decision. These findings. It's really interesting to note that Dr. Miller-Saunders gave to her immediate superiors a complete lay description of the findings, so there could be no uncertainty as to how important the findings were. She said in her initial email on December 15th at 1 p.m. that our models have revealed population level associations with survival and condition with this agent, being mouth rot, for coho, chinook, and sockeye salmon. She also pointed out that she'd been discussing these findings, the work that was being done to arrive at these findings with staff for more than a year. So this is nothing coming out of the blue at them. An excerpt from the lay description that Dr. Miller provided made it clear. Contributions from Discovery Island salmon farms dwarf those from other salmon farming locations. Farm source infection pressure peaked at 12.7 times the background infection levels for this agent. The model resulted in an 87.9% reduction in smolt survival. It was very clear. The summary paragraph at the end of that lay description laid it out even more clearly. Our models raise realistic and serious concerns about farm origin transmission of mouth rot to Fraser River sockeye salmon and population level impacts to Chinook, coho, and sockeye. Although there remains uncertainty, she says, it is the bulk of evidence rather than any one particular model that should give pause. Taken together, the results identify mouth rot as one of the most likely candidates for population level impacts on wild populations and present evidence that infections in Fraser River sockeye may originate from salmon farm sources, especially in the Discovery Islands. Given knowledge about the depressed state of Fraser River sockeye stocks, the evidence we've presented suggests extreme caution and further research are required.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Riston. We're gone well over the 5-minute allotment, but hopefully anything you didn't get out will be come out in the rounds of questioning to come now very shortly. So we'll go to Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes or less, please. And I would remind committee members to, if you can, identify who you want to ask the question to for the answer. It'll make it go much more smoothly and you'll get more value out of your time. So Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. It's important to all of us on the committee to get as much information as we can. I'll start with Mr. DeCicco, if we can. Mr. DeCicco, where the Cohen Commission focused on Fraser River sockeye salmon, the committee's current study is examining the state of all Pacific salmon stocks. Justice Cohen used the term, and I quote, more than minimal risk of serious harm when he defined the threshold of risk or harm that the government should apply when managing impacts of open net pen salmon farms on wild Pacific fish or salmon. In your opinion, is there scientific evidence that open net pen salmon aquaculture in British Columbia poses more than a minimal risk of harm to wild Pacific salmon?
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, we had to approach this in two ways, I would say. So for one, there is definitely worldwide evidence that aquaculture operations have an impact on wild population when they both coexist in the same region. So we're talking about here in the West Coast, and the same thing applies in Europe. But as Karen Briston just mentioned in her previous statement, it's a cumulative sum of different factors that actually raise the question and whether there is actually such a minimal impact or much more than that. So we have to consider a few factors in this aspect. First of all, we have evidences that fish farm carry a plethora of agents, and agents that can be a threat to Pacific salmon. In this case, it can be even wild Pacific salmon. And they can carry in a concentration. So the Tenacibaculum case is one of them, but they can be applied to several also different agents. And in this case, the farmers can work as an incubator for this agent, but at the same time, it can work also as a reservoir. There was a case with the VHS, which is a virus that infects the herrings that can be retained by the farmers as a reservoir and impacting herrings, which is a food source for salmon as well. The other thing to consider is that wild salmon that swim by, like sockeye salmon, for example, in Discovery Island, or salmon that live nearby, like, for example, Chinook on the west coast of Vancouver Island, have a higher probability to pick up these agents that are release a high concentration from the farms. So that's another risk factor to add to the puzzle. Then we have evidences that some of these agents actually can cause can induce a lesion and disease, just like we see in farm fish, and therefore, for example, would be an example of PRV.
Okay,
And
I hate to cut you off because I'm sure there's much more you can add.
Sure.
But in your opinion, is there evidence that open net pen salmon aquaculture poses more than minimal harm to wild Pacific salmon?
Yes, if you put all the evidence together, yes, there is more.
Okay, thank you. I want to move on to Dr. Rosenau now, if I could. Mr. Rosenau, 2005 and 2006 were brood years for the record low run in 2009 and the record high run in 2010, respectively. What significant factors would account for such a wide range in returns from those consecutive brood years? Dr. Rosenau.
Yeah, hi Mel, how you doing? I'm assuming you're referring to sockeye?
Sockeye, yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, Fraser River sockeye have 4-year cycles, and there's typically a very large brood year every 4 years, which is dominated usually by Adams River fish. And it seems like there was the perfect positive storm for the group of animals that went out for the 2010, so that would have been 2008 smolt out migration. Perhaps the fish farming industry, and I'm a proponent of the theory that fish farms have an impact, may have dealt with some of these diseases, specifically sea lice. 2009 would have been a small run in any event, and the perfect storm of good oceanographic conditions, perhaps the fish farms and whatever diseases were at a minimal, and so that's why we can have this flip-flop.
Okay, thank you. If I can move on to Ms. Riston now. Ms. Riston, do you agree with the statement from, pardon me, I'll start with the preamble. I know you have a background in law, so I'd like to ask a legal question. In its 1997 decision in the Como Seafood Limited versus Canada, the Supreme Court stated that the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans holds the responsibility to, quote, manage, conserve, and develop the fishery on behalf of Canadians in the public interest. Ms. Riston, do you agree with that statement from the Supreme Court?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. Going back to Mr. DeCicco now, do the findings from the 9 strategic salmon health assessment risks for all wild salmon, or do they apply to all wild salmon populations and the risk from aquaculture operations?
No, they don't. The title itself of the assessment say that the assessment were based on sockeye salmon and aquaculture in the Discovery Islands, so they don't apply to all the species. They don't apply to all the regions.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for attending. I want to. This is very revealing information today, Dr. DeCicco and Ms. Worston. Key question for me is, okay, we've taken the move and we've shut down, or we are in the process of shutting down the operations in the Discovery Island. Is there remediation work that has to take place at those locations, or can we just let them pull up their gear and go away?
Question for whom?
Oh, I'm sorry. We'll start with Dr. DeCicco.
Oh. Well, what happens when you empty a farm is can you hear me? Yeah, yes. What happens when you empty a farm because you remove all the fish is that you cannot clean the water around the farm, but it takes some time to actually go to base level of agents, remaining of food, drugs, whatever is used during the production cycle. And it usually takes some months. And it depends how much is the flow, the tidal flow, how much the the location is secluded or not. But it takes some time usually to go back to the original situation before the fish were put in. Again,
what about the? I'm sorry,
months.
Doctor. What about the ocean floor? Because there'd be a lot of debris, detritus from the operation down there.
Well, it takes weeks, if not months.
Okay, Ms. Worston, your thoughts?
Sorry, I can't really add to what Dr. DeCicco said. It recovers naturally as far as the ocean floor is concerned. My concern is that the infrastructure is removed.
The obviously the community impacts of closing down the operations in the Discovery Islands, have been noted, and we've certainly heard from them. I heard Dr. DeCicco reference the operations on the west coast of Vancouver Island, where tidal activity, etc., must be quite a bit different than it would be in the Discovery Islands, one would think. And does that make a difference in terms of the, if you like, the acceptability of aquaculture operations?
Well, the water flow is definitely different, but also the life stage and in general, the life of the fish that live in those areas is different. So when we talk about the Discovery Island, we're talking about those islands that are between Vancouver Island and the mainland, and usually the fish use that area to migrate through going up north when they are juvenile and coming down when they are adult. What happened on the west coast is slightly different. We have population, for example, of Chinook and Co. that spend the first year of their life in those sounds where there are also farms. So in that case, they are not exposed during the migration, but they are exposed during the whole first year of life. So I don't think either of the two is actually good.
Okay. Mr. Rosenau, when we talk about habitat, is there kind of a joint care and attention necessary between the province and the federal government when it comes to especially dealing with habitat, in the inland waters?
Thanks, Honorable Hardy. I've just been advised that the province has pulled out of habitat in the eastern part of the province, as an example, and DFO has had to go move back as per constitutionally requirement under the Canadian Constitution. It's fractured. Forest rules are different. There's a combination of provincial and federal collaboration within the urban environments, so the riparian area regulation types of legislation. DFO seemed to pull out, and I don't know if they're coming back. So there's kind of a mixture of collaboration and, in some cases, very close connections, and in other cases, split right apart. So it's a bit of a grab bag from my experience.
So we've heard that water temperature can quite often be an issue, certainly out in the deep ocean, but again in the freshwater cycles. So we have water temperature, we have the availability of food, as well as we have the beds, the stream beds and the lake beds. Where, in your view, is most of the damage taking place, or is it evenly distributed across all those aspects of the habitat?
What I would suggest is that it's not evenly distributed. Concentrations really occur, for example, in areas of population. There's all this sort of death by a thousand cuts in the Lower Mainland, where every little development, every little shopping center, every little parking lot that goes up affects habitat. Of course, we have large mine proposals in the interior of the province. So I would suggest that within areas of development, community development, lots of sort of diffuse impacts that are just as serious as, say, a large mine going up. The Mount Poly mine is a good example where it did collapse and things kind of spiraled out of control.
And while I still have time, we've asked this question a number of times.
Sorry, Mr. Hardy.
Oh, we have lost
Hardy, your time just ran out.
Darn.
Only in the questions, though. We'll now go on to Madam Gill for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is very, very interesting. I lost track of time. Thank you to all three of our witnesses for their testimony. Madame Reston, I listened to you very closely, and certainly there are multi-factor causes with what is happening to the Pacific salmon. I'd like to hear you speak to us at greater length about what you were saying about what's going on in the department itself. You mentioned that there were marked differences between the scientific information that the department had to make its proposals to the minister. Same thing when Dr. Sanders, if I'm not mistaken, was here, said about the same thing. So there was some murkiness to the scientific data. What could be improved here? How could you improve the situation in the department itself?
Well, that's a large question. Let me confine my remarks to what happened with these scientific recommendations. They were written down, so to speak. The significance of the remarks was obscured by titling them, by prefacing them with the suggestion they were unpublished and somehow less than the dire warning that Christy Miller was trying to convey up the chain of command. It's not even clear that this information was placed before the minister before she made her decision based on the paper record that we see. And certainly there's nothing in the record of decision that appeared in the court proceedings, of which I'm a party, which is why I know about it, that would suggest that she had the information before making the decision. And this has really important ramifications in practice. The companies are in court right now trying to get an injunction to reverse this decision to allow them to stock the farms in the Discovery Islands. And the judge hearing that case will have no evidence before it of the dire impacts to Fraser River sockeye that could ensue should he decide to restock those farms. It's simply missing from the record, and that is indefensible. What needs to happen in order to prevent this from happening again is the mandate that DFO has to promote the industry must be removed from that department. They cannot both promote aquaculture and adequately protect wild salmon. They can certainly regulate aquaculture. They have the knowledge to do that, but they cannot promote it and reconcile that promotion with the protection of wild salmon. It's been clear that that has not happened in the past, and there's no indication it can happen going forward.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Ms. Reston. You went even further by beginning your answer. You've gotten into my second question that I want to ask of all the witnesses. Is there any possible type of conciliation that could be available in terms of the salmon population and also the economic needs? Is there any type of possible conciliation between the economic factors that are important and the respect for the environment and the the salmon population? That is to all of the witnesses, please, if you could answer. Thank you.
I might go first. Well, the sustainability means, when you have a sustainable activity, it means that you have a balance between the economic factor, the social factor, and the financial factor, the economic factor. So trying to find a balance among these three big areas is not very easy, I would say. Myself, I've been struggling to understand what would be a way to address all the three factors at the same time. The idea to have a close containment industry, I think, not necessarily on land, maybe, but definitely a close containment industry might help to basically maintain a certain economic impact in the region while not giving the environmental impact to the environment. That would be my idea.
Go ahead, ladies first.
Thanks, Marvin. I would say that there are a number of economic activities that could replace the economic activity of open net pen salmon farming. Land-based salmon farming is only one of those. There are also opportunities for the farming of things like seaweed and bivalves that do not interfere with the environmental integrity and in fact enhance it and provide habitat for other species. There are opportunities for very small scale land-based salmon farming developments that could be within the competence of a small community or First Nations community on the island. We have lots of alternatives if we think broadly enough about what it is we're trying to replace here. But in terms of reconciliation of both farmed salmon and wild salmon in the water, we see no evidence anywhere in the world that this is possible.
In response to your question, Madam, my view, and I've discussed this again with some of the members of Parliament some years ago, and in effect, I think the most pragmatic is to choose parts of the coast where the where salmon runs are very minimal, where the large Fraser River stocks aren't migrating through, and just basically say we're going to sacrifice those areas. I think the fish farming industry is so large and so economically powerful that you have to come up with sort of cutting the baby down the middle in the sort of Solomon's way of dealing with it, and move these guys to areas, and it may cause some problems with respect to companies conflicting one against another, but providing safe passageways. Nootka Sound versus Barkley Sound. Nootka has lots of farms, no fish. Barkley, no farms, lots of fish.
Okay, thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now go on to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Hardy asked a question, Dr. DeChico, about the west coast of Vancouver Island, and we've seen plummeting returns, whether it be in Tofino Creek, Atleo River, Tranquil River, all in Tloquit and the Howsett Nation territory, and the Kennedy as well. Do you believe that salmon farms have had an impact on those wild stock returns?
Well, I believe so. We even been trying to do a study directly in that area to assess what was the impact of the agents in that type of population. Because as I said, particularly Chinook and Co, they spend a lot of time in the first phase of their life inside the sound. And so they are in close contact to the farms that are present in that area for a long period of time. So the impact is definitely prolonged and that can be detrimental for the survival.
We've heard about mouth rot, PRV, sea lice. We've had escapes. We've had die-offs. This is a question for Ms. Riston. The Cohen Commission cited number 3, the Government of Canada should remove from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans the mandate to promote, be the promotion of salmon farming as an industry and farm salmon as a product. Do you believe that they can be both the regulator and the agent, the regulator to protect wild salmon?
No, it simply has not worked out at all for the wild salmon in that regard. The mandate to expand the industry to help it grow has overtaken at every turn considerations of the impacts on wild salmon. And I mean, I could provide you with a host of examples, very specific examples of how that's happened. Mouth rot would be a good one. The government's been studying mouth rot together with industry since at least 2009. But in 2019, it couldn't answer the question, do wild fish get it? In 2019, it couldn't answer the question, how many sea lice are there on migrating Fraser River sockeye? They just don't look at any of the questions that need to be looked at to protect the wild fish, because if they did, they couldn't promote the salmon farming.
Given that, do you believe that British Columbians can trust the science that the government has? Because we've had several reports and a recent Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat that said that PRV is endemic in British Columbia, not a concern. This is right there. And would you agree that PRV is not of concern, like DFO is saying, or is PRV concerning you? What is the failure of DFO to not take PRV seriously?
PRV is a very good example, and I think Dr. DeChico is probably better qualified than I to answer this question.
Sure, why don't we let him answer that? That'd be great.
Yeah.
So I think there has been an interpretation of the word endemic by the FOPO and the application in this case, because endemic can usually be seen as consistently present in a population as opposed to epidemic, or
what about minimal concern? They keep saying minimal concern.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is even if it was endemic and is not, there are endemic agents that are of concern. There is IHN, which is another virus endemic of BC, endemic of sockeye, but if they get IHN, they die. So it's a major concern even if that agent is endemic. So saying that because it's endemic is not a problem, it's wrong.
So if this is being left out of scientific assessments, what does it tell you about, or tell all of us about the processes within the department?
Well, the process as it was set up for those 9 reviews was wrong from the start, in the sense that they're already narrowing the scope to only sockeye salmon and only in that region. They were already posing themselves for a failure of a meaningful review from the start.
Ms. Riston, I'm hoping you can tell the committee a bit more about sea lice on wild salmon, and maybe you can tell us about the impact sea lice has on an individual fish, and how has that infection rate on Fraser River sockeye changed between 2015 and 2020?
Well, it's Fraser River sockeye are very much at risk from sea lice, particularly as they were passing through the Discovery Islands in 2020. The monitoring results from 2020 indicated 99% of the fish sampled were infected with an average of 9 lice per fish. At that rate, the fish are suffering extreme stress that's interfering with their ability to regulate their blood chemistry. They're not likely to feed well, and their chances of survival are severely depressed. So these are the...
Yeah, maybe when we have infection rates that are large, that you're seeing like that, what does that mean for salmon returns? And there's lots of things impacting wild salmon returns. Is there a way we can quantify or look at sea lice infections impacting these numbers? And is this an isolated problem just for the Fraser in terms of salmon, and also the pesticides that the companies are using? Maybe you can speak about that as well.
Yeah, no, it's not isolated to the Fraser River salmon by any means. Fraser sockeye did take quite a beating this year, but other places where the lice have been out of control because they are now resistant to drugs, it's been the same case. Clayoquot Sound's another good case in point. The Broughton was until we started removing salmon farms and reduced the lice pressure there. So it's everywhere. It's not going to change because sea lice are not something that can be controlled. It's not happened anywhere in the world, and it's not going to happen here. I'm sorry, Mr. Johns, the second part of your question just escaped me. You asked me 2 very distinct things. And you're on mute.
In terms of the infection rate being this large, can you talk about, how we can quantify or look at sea lice infections impacting stocks and these large numbers?
Quick answer, please.
In terms of quantifying it, I mean, we know where they're being impacted. Quantifying the impact on individual runs is extremely difficult because we don't have a great deal of data on runs in many, many parts of the province. They've dwindled to almost nothing. They can't stand any more impact. That's all we really need to know at this point.
Looks like you're trying to give me some time there, Mr. Chair, so I'll just go ahead and take it.
Yeah, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. So my questions will be primarily for Ms. Riston and Dr. DeCicco. Would it be fair to say that Tenacibaculum is ubiquitous in the Pacific Ocean, or is it more ubiquitous wherever there's fish farming?
I'll go with that. Ubiquitous in that case it would be it's ubiquitous in the Pacific Ocean, but it's definitely more prevalent around salmon farms.
Okay, so the prevalence is increased around farming. It doesn't appear to be only a salmonid issue. Is that correct? You find it in flatfish. You find it in various stocks throughout the water column from the ground fish right to the surface. Correct?
Yes, no, it can impact several different species. The mouth rot that Dr. Wilson was referring to, it's a particular manifestation for Atlantic salmon, but Tenacibaculosis, that's the name of the disease, occur in different species.
Okay, so is it transferable between species?
I don't think there's been a challenge where we try to go from one species to the other, but I wouldn't exclude that.
Okay. I want to talk about the infection fatality rate for Tenacibaculum. Is it the same for juvenile as it is for adult salmonids?
Well, I would say it's probably one of the main causes of high mortality, at least in the farms where it's easier to study it compared to all the other agents that usually occur. In the first 3 months, probably is the main cause of the mortality. Pretty acute significant mortality.
So, sorry, would that be primarily in juvenile, or is it actually, does it matter?
It can happen in every phase, but it's more common in juvenile, yes.
And we're looking at 87% infection rate. So when we're talking about the spatially determined along the migration, I think Ms. Riston brought that up. Have you cross-referenced this with the research that's done by Quintama and others to verify that that this mouth rot or Tenacibaculum actually does correspond with the findings of those spatial studies that Quintama has done?
So this study was actually performed for 2 years. The first year, which is the one I have reference for, was a test on a region where there were basically very few, if any, active farms. So the permanence of the fish in that area was very short. I don't have the definitive data of the second year, but the permanence was definitely longer once the farms were actually present.
Okay, how does it get? How does Tenacibaculum get into a fish farm? What's is it attracted there? Does it just develop there naturally and get more, or is it something that's brought in? Is it introduced? How
well,
do we know?
As I said, it's an ubiquitous bacteria, which means it can stay in the water column. Some studies say that associated also with jellyfish. So it stays in the water column, and then when fish are stressed and you have intensive farming in a farm, then this is an opportunistic bacteria. When there is something not going properly, that's when it infect the fish and then explode.
Are you aware of any studies that try to use any type of antibacterial, any type of drugs or chemicals like that?
Yeah, no, it's a treatable disease with antibiotics, but sometimes the treatment has to be prolonged for a long time in order to resolve the disease.
How long does it take between? Do we know how long it takes between infection or when the bacteria sets in and death?
It's usually a pretty acute disease, so we are talking about days.
Yeah, we're not okay. Wow, days. Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about the record returns of salmon in 2010 and 2014, I believe were the years. Everybody tells me that the salmon migrated out along the west side and didn't go up through the archipelago, and that's why we had those record salmon returns for the Fraser. And yet, Dr. DeChico, you've indicated that there is salmon farms now in Barkley Sound and so on, and Mr. Johns has brought it up as well. So can you clarify for me, does it really matter which way the salmon go around the island? When it comes to, I just can't understand why we had record returns in those 2 years, and then with not much else changing in the interim, all of a sudden we have all these reductions and these critical levels of certain stocks in the Fraser.
Well, unfortunately, to answer the question, I would say it depends by the species. Like if we're talking about the sockeye.
Sockeyes, yeah.
Yes, well, sockeye, they don't go inside the bays like Chinook and co. They live there. And so they stay in open water. In that case, they
pass by. They pass by the sound. Okay. Ms. Riston, do you have any evidence to support your claim that DFO is being purposefully negligent? I mean, you made a pretty bold statement here before the committee, indicating that the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is being willfully negligent in studying things like sea lice and so on in order to fulfill their mandate of being pro-fish farm. Do you have any ATIPs, any information, any records that would support your claim?
Yes, and you'll see them when you get my speaking notes. And I did not call them willfully negligent. I think this is not negligent conduct. I think this is deliberate conduct.
Okay, maybe it's my poor choice of words. So you actually have supporting evidence to say that this is deliberate. Okay, I'll look through it.
In this case, we do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Calkins. You're more than welcome, sir. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll put Ms. May on notice that I'm going to give her a few moments to ask a couple of questions as well. We've received information that the deep ocean conditions have changed. Climate change, which is a real thing, has impacted the sources of food, the plankton, etc., out there, and that the Chinook coming back are smaller. They're coming back sooner. They're just simply not in as good a condition to lay eggs and procreate. And I guess the question is, what can we do to offset the deep ocean conditions over which we have very, very little control? I'll actually go to Mr. Rosenau on that one, and maybe then Dr. DeCicco after.
Thank you very much. Well, I guess what I would say is that if you look at south of the border, south of the Canada-U.S. border, yeah, there have been declines in species like Chinook and coho, but in fact, those declines are not nearly as precipitous as in the Fraser River and the Gulf of Georgia. So there's a lack of synchrony. And in fact, our Okanagan River sockeye are probably, some of the years are now as high or higher than the whole Fraser River watershed. So yeah, there are some issues, and there are these semi-decadal oscillations whereby there's always been very large ups and downs over time that are independent of anything that's happening inside of Gulf of Georgia or this greater, larger Pacific Ocean thing. So I think the big picture is climate change, but notwithstanding that, there's something very, very specific about inside southwestern BC and the Fraser River that is different than south of the border and up in Alaska, some years of record runs.
All right, Dr. DeCicco, briefly, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, what I would say, just as I said in my opening statement, is that I think we can control anthropogenic impact on the survival of fish. Like we have a very little control, honestly, on climate change, other than maybe on the gray scheme. So it's and definitely availability of food is controlled by climate change. So I don't think we have much directly here that we can do to fix that. We can control other aspects, but that one is pretty hard to control from us.
All right, thank you for that. Ms. May, do you have questions you'd like to ask?
Thank you, Ken. I'm going to ask, given that I probably have very little time, want to just run some things by you, Karen Riston, and confirm if I've got it right. Not to say that I don't think Blaine Calkins intended to say something that was inaccurate. I just wanted to double check that I've got it right. I think Blaine said that we were seeing an 87% infection rate, and I believe it was 87% reduction of survival. Can you confirm if I got that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And what I think you're saying is that there was a deliberate attempt by people within the department to keep science away from the minister before she made her critical decision. Is that your understanding based on what you have from your ATIP report?
Yes, I think it's quite clear from the exchange of emails that an attempt was made to downplay the decision, the findings, and whether or not those were actually given to the minister, as I say, is completely unclear.
And I would like to ask, I'm not a full member of this committee, obviously, unless that you've already done so, could you make sure that the committee has all of the ATIP material that you have that led you to that conclusion of deliberate interference to block science from the minister's desk for purposes of a correct decision?
Yes, I can certainly share the ATIP.
Okay. And lastly, as a current Vancouver Islander, I was a Cape Breton Islander, and we tried for years. Ransom Myers was a dear friend of mine. We tried for years to protect the North Atlantic cod stocks, while DFO practiced a religion of believing there was things called the spawning biomass. We had paper fish, but not real fish. And I would have hoped that by now DFO's culture had changed. Do you think that at this point we should move promotion of aquaculture maybe to the Department of Agriculture and agri-food and take it right away from DFO?
That would certainly be my preference. I think agriculture is well placed to do that marketing and promotion. And I think DFO needs to be instructed that their primary mandate is the restoration of wild salmon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. May. Almost right on time. And I think we'll all agree you're an islander, regardless of which one it is. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Ms. Gill? I'm sorry I didn't hear. Please, I apologize. Well, thank you. I do have a question for Mr. DeCicco. In your opening remarks, you mentioned the urgency of the situation, and you said that much had to be done, but that we had very little control over what was happening. What should be done to find a solution to this situation?
Well, you refer to the situation about controlling diseases or promoting a rebound of Pacific salmon, because those are two different things.
Well, my question was very general in nature. I just want to hear you say what you feel is more important for your testimony here. I just want to give you the opportunity to complete your thinking and your remarks.
No, thank you for that. Well, as I said, as a fish health operator, I would say definitely there needs to be more monitoring and control of those operations. And as Dr. Wilson also said, definitely transparency in the results so that we can take informed decision on how to deal with the diseases happening in the farms, and now we can help not having these agents infecting wild fish either.
You're on mute, Madam Gill.
Ce qui se passe aujourd'hui.
Oh, I don't know what's happening today. Thank you, Chair. Perhaps for the other witnesses, any of the witnesses, if you have anything that each of you would like to add to this situation of urgency that has been expressed by Mr. DeCiccio, what can we do for salmon?
I guess, in my view, we're at an unprecedented crisis. You know, we've had the big bar incident where the Fraser River collapsed and the upriver stocks aren't able to get up there. This seems to be remediated, but boy, things have to change. Otherwise, our kids will have absolutely zero. But the problem that I tell my students is this already happened in 1994 and 95. So it's like the passenger pigeon for coho. We had 1 million fish being caught in the Gulf of Georgia, and now we've got basically zero wild fish. So this is a catastrophe unprecedented in modern Canadian history.
If I may, I think that one solution might be to implement another of Justice Cohen's recommendations, which was to ensure that there is a position within DFO that is responsible for wild salmon. One position that is dedicated to the rebuilding of salmon stocks. The House is currently working on the rebuilding provisions of the Fisheries Act, I believe. It's important that that be given life through an individual who will be responsible to ensure that those provisions are implemented.
Thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes, please.
And Dr. DeCiccio, in 2018, the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development published a report indicating that DFO, quote, has not made sufficient progress in completing risk assessments for key diseases, which were required to assess the effects of salmon farming on wild fish, end quote. Would you agree with this assessment?
Yes, and they didn't do their job either later when they did the 9SCSS review. Again, by narrowing the scope and ignoring a lot of other issues, they didn't succeed on doing that even later.
Ms. Riston, in the event that the federal government isn't successful in closing down open net pen fish farms, for example, if the companies involved in the injunction right now win their case, or different governments were to, say, reverse course on the transition away from open net pen salmon farms, can you elaborate on what's at stake and what would happen if companies are able to restock farms that impact Fraser River sockeye?
We can only imagine that given the twin threats they'll face, the sea lice at 99%, the impaired survival 89% from mouth rot, we could wipe out fully half of the recovery potential of Fraser River sockeye. I mean, this year and next year, every single smolt that makes it down the river is of critical importance. And so everything we can do to make sure that they survive is essential. If those farms are restocked during the next 2 years, they will not be able to control their sea lice, and they will have outbreaks of mouth rot, and it will be transmitted to those smolts. It's unthinkable that this would happen. Thank you for the question.
You bet. Dr. Rosenau, can you speak about, the BC Salmon Restoration Fund? You talked a lot about mitigation impacts. Thank you for talking about that and citing the important work that needs to be done. The BC Salmon Restoration Fund is $148 million over 5 years. The NDP's been saying that we need that actually every year for the next 5 years to remediate a lot of the damaged habitat. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that, and I think that it kind of harkens back to the old salmonid enhancement days back in the 70s and 80s. It's basically pocket change in my view. Not only British Columbia is salmon and salmon is British Columbia. I would like to add, though, and it goes back to my heart of the Fraser issue with the large islands, if we can't stem the tide of some of these really serious habitat losses, and that particular stretch between Hope and Mission, which is absolutely critical to Fraser River stocks. We've got Big Bar, we've got Heart of the Fraser, we've got sea lice and the mouth rot up in, these are catastrophic things. And so my sort of focus, although I know stuff about fish farms, I'm familiar with it, my focus again would be on the Heart of the Fraser. Take some of that money, which DFO has been hesitant to do, and put it onto that.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Zimmer, who's in the committee room for 5 minutes or less, please.
Yeah, thank you again it's great to be back at Fisheries and Oceans Committee. Dr. Rosenau, I was just actually at the Heart of the Fraser a couple of weeks ago, and I see some of the loss of habitat that you're referring to in some of your images. And I think there's we talked about with the person I was there, just a lack of understanding of what actually is salmon habitat. And when you see that even sturgeon, in the water is at high levels, even some of the forested areas, people just don't understand that's where fish are. And that's critical to their survival. But I wanted to just speak to you, I think, about the frustration about the lack of enforcement about some of the regulations along the Fraser. I've spoken to a lot of the members of the public fishery, and one of their frustrations is watching sort of the lack of the implementation of regulations in some respects. And you referred to this in your opening statement. How would you fix this? You talk about enforcement and, implementation. How would you make it better?
Well, thank you very much. You must have been out with my friend, Dean Work.
I was.
Who's a great guy.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I would say that it comes from the top. There has to be a psychological change in regards to direction, right from the executive down. We know back in the 1990s to about 2013, gravel removal was a big deal. Ostensibly for flood protection. We knew it was just for the construction industry. We'd meet, the stewardship groups would meet with the local and the sort of middle managers, and we'd say, there's no benefit for flood protection. You're destroying a bunch of habitat. And they would say, yeah, but we've got this direction from Ottawa. Ottawa says take the gravel out. It's a political thing. And so, there were no secrets really. And I think it has to come from the top that the senior folks have to support they have to support the line staff, people out in the field. We have something known as Section 35.2, which is ecologically significant areas. And so this is a great thing. It was put into play about 2 years ago. Again, it relates to the stuff you're talking about. And when we talk to the senior middle guys in DFO, they're saying, well, that's not going to happen for 2 or 3 years because the senior folks at the executive are not going to support something like that. So, it's a psychological thing, has to change right in Ottawa, I think.
Well, and what I think from the many members that I've spoken with, I spoke with Brian Riddell too, former PSF, chair, and just about what do we do now? That need for that grander plan. We all have these different pieces that need to be put into one overall puzzle to fix this issue. I was just going to ask you, just generally, you referred to the big bar slide, and one thing that we saw as a member of BC caucus, members from BC, the inaction around the big bar slide. We were wanting to get in there and do some work on this removal of debris and that in the winter when the water was low, and the impacts would have been relatively small. what would be a different reaction? And I don't know if there's still, you said it was mainly remediated at this point, you thought, but quick action was required and it just didn't happen. And maybe just some comments there.
I was actually interviewed by CBC and I said, you guys got to get out there. And it's not like I really knew what was going on more than a lot of people, but I have a lot of contacts inside of DFO and some of their line guys are going, we need to get going, guys. I guess what I've been seeing is a really fast reaction relative to once they got going. We had the folks give a presentation to my class, and it's quite amazing what they have done. I think there needs to be more, but that's my sense is that it's a big deal.
Yeah, to me, I would hope that we would have, I think DFO needs to look at the way they have managed BC salmon. And some of these responses are needed, not within months or years, they're needed within hours or days. And we need a much more responsive DFO to these pressing issues. But maybe, I don't know how much time I have, Chair.
40 seconds.
Okay. Talking about a general, I'll go back to Dr. Rosenau, just because you know the area so well. About this desire for a plan for BC salmon as a holistic plan that goes much more beyond political cycles. I call them election cycle economics at times, or election cycle, in terms of projects like this. What do the need is there and it's a big ask. It's like engineering a huge building and with all the details. But what would you say to that, Dr. Rosen?
Well, notwithstanding, some issues that people were maybe not satisfied with the Cohen Commission, I think you almost have to strike a commission to figure that out because no individual can kind of come up with it all. And you're right, it's just a big engineering project.
Yeah. Thank you,
Thank
Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Now we'll go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Dr. DeSico. Doctor, as a scientist, is climate change real? And what are the negative impacts that you are witnessing by a changing climate on fish stocks in general?
Well, I will start. Yes, it's real, and I'm not the only one saying that. So I will start with that. Well, the impact of climate change on salmon actually can happen on these different aspects. So it's not only fish are heterothermic, which means they use the temperature of the surrounding environment they have the temperature of the surrounding environment. And so when you have adult fish coming up to a river and the river, the temperature of the river is 20, 25 degrees, which is not the optimal temperature for those fish to live. They are overstressed. And so that will be a first impact. On the other hand, if you have increased temperature in the ocean, the whole trophic chain it's altered. So the way how algae and phytoplankton bloom, and therefore how shrimps that feed on them proliferate, and therefore what kind of amount of food is available for salmon. It's all a chain. And unfortunately, this change happen even with the minimal change in temperature. We're talking about even a couple of degrees Celsius can trigger this big change in productivity.
So a warming ocean is for your advice to this committee on a warming ocean is going to reduce the number of fish or the size of fish stocks in the ocean, simply?
Put it very, very simple, that would be one of the effects that you can have because you have less food, and so the fish have a harder time to find food, so they don't grow as much, and some of them might die because they don't have enough food.
So the alarms have been sounding on the East Coast too about the impacts of a warming ocean on lobster stocks, which is one of the most valuable lobster and crab stocks on the East Coast. So if any government doesn't get its mind around this and begin dealing with it, then we're going to see less economic activity in any community attached to and dependent on the fishery. Would that be a correct assumption, Doctor?
I would say so.
Okay, I want to thank you. I want to question Mr. Rosenau. You made a statement in your testimony you were given that one of the issues that's affecting salmon on the West Coast, besides the issue of the impact of changing ocean temperature and climate change, is the failure to properly monitor and restore habitat. And you made a comment about the closure of DFO offices. Could you give me a timeline and expand on that a bit? When, what impact that has had in providing adequate protection, Mr. Rosenau?
Thank you very much. This came from a conversation from one of the enforcement staff out of the Kamloops office, and it was a recent conversation. I know that back in the day when I was a habitat person with the province, DFO had a presence, and his point was that all habitat basically in the interior up to Prince George, all the way out to Cranbrook, is now managed through the Kamloops office, which is a massive geographic area. It's like a small European country. And that, I'm guessing that would have happened somewhere in the previous government prior to the Trudeau government. So can't give you an exact date, but it certainly is a concern. And the fact that the province has pulled out of a lot of habitat stuff they normally did makes DFO now responsible under the Constitution.
So past cutbacks and reductions in DFO personnel is partially of why we are here today. Dr. Rosenau or Mr. Rosenau, and if anybody would want to comment, land-based fish farming is becoming clear the impact on sea-based fish farming, but land-based fish farming, why is it prohibitive?
Well, I used to be married to a fish culturist with the province, Freshwater Fisheries Society, and it's just expensive. Pumps and electricity and tanks and moving water around. So that's my view. And we did have some little net pen operations when I was working in the province. They were great because all the poop just drops to the bottom of the lake. So yeah, it's just for me outside the box here. Really, is just pure economics.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. We'll now go back to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to Mr. DeCicco if we can. Mr. DeCicco, many of these scientific assessments were a derivative of the Strategic Salmon Health Initiative that the Conservative government initiated in a response to the Cohen Commission, again, started by the Conservative government. Are there any issues or concerns or limitations in the 9 assessments that were done, in your opinion?
Yes, they are, and there are several limitations. As I mentioned at the beginning, the fact that there was a very narrow scope addressing only sockeye salmon and only in a very specific area, which was the Discovery Island. But they definitely also, they didn't take into account several new information that came out in the last couple of years. And I'm referring in particular to two assessments, the one on PRV and the one on Tennessee baculum. There were a few errors that would change the actual results of those impact, and they definitely glazed over the uncertainties, as Dr. Bristen said. If you say a statement, but you have a high uncertainty, that statement has a completely different value if you have a very high certainty. Then sea lice were completely excluded from the assessment. And
do you know why sea lice were excluded from that?
Myself, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Is there any evidence demonstrating the risk to wild salmon from PRV? I believe you spoke about that earlier. I just didn't quite catch exactly what you were saying. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Yes. Yeah, so PRV is a virus that is highly prevalent in salmon farms, and but it's a virus that has been demonstrated that can infect all the Pacific salmon, and we have an overwhelming amount of evidence from around the world that different types of PRV can actually induce disease in Pacific salmon. So that would be already one piece of evidence. Plus, we have more recent evidences that there is an association between the presence of PRV and potential impact in this fish regarding the survival or the body condition of these wild fish that are infected with the virus.
Okay, thank you. And can you give an indication as to how far from the, whether it's the farm sites or where there's a concentration of these pathogens, how much of an effect does distance or distance separation or close proximity have to the apparent or potential infection rates? We talk about migration paths. Is there opportunity for other sites that are away from migration paths to be possibly used? And is there a potential for deeper offshore ocean sites to be used without the same risk of infection or transfer?
Well, again, we had to calculate the cost and benefits, and the impact on the spreading of agents from the farms has a lot of variables on where the farm is located. Like if you are in a very strict channel, of course, it's easier to contain the agents in that channel going back and forth with the tides. So there are different variables. I would say overall, we have seen an effect within 30 kilometers from a farm. And again, it's a gradual distribution. Very close to the farm is very concentrated, and as far as you go from the farm, you have a more diluted concentration of agents. Offshore farming, I know it's a solution that has been taken into account in some other countries. It has cost and benefits. The fact that it would dilute the concentration of agents and pollutant and also let's say the production from the fish. That's definitely a pro, but dealing with the open ocean condition sometimes challenging from the structure of the farm. So as I said, it's a pro and con on that type of operations.
Okay, thank you. Any time left, Chair?
You have 12 seconds.
Quickly, Mr. Rosano, what produced the high runs that we had in 2010 and 2014?
That's part of the cycle. And 2010 was 30 million, roughly. 2014 was 20, and 2018, so down, same cycle run. What that, again, I think is just a perfect storm of good conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This wouldn't be a study on any fishery in the West Coast if we didn't bring up the issue of predation, and particularly the impact of seals and sea lions on the smolts. You were mentioning that we have to do everything we can to protect the next batch of smolts coming down the Fraser River. Is it, and Dr. DeCicco, I'll ask you, is it your observation that the seal and sea lion issue is one of the things that is causing the lack of survivability?
Well, predator definitely play a role. We have to consider there are two factors when we consider predator, which is a predator also remove sick fish from a population. So that's one benefit actually of having predator, but we have to take into consideration the balance between predator and prey. So I would say it might be a contributing factor, but the actual amount of that factor, I think, still has to be evaluated, and there are contrasting studies on that.
Mr. Rosano, we've heard comments in the past that some of the flood control systems in use along the Fraser River are old and were designed without fish survivability in mind. Is this your observation, and would you have a recommendation about how much emphasis should we put on updating and modernizing those systems?
Thank you very much. The flood system is actually pretty good in terms of the diking. It's the pump stations that are old and decrepit, or at least some of them. The local governments have been slowly upgrading, so the Sumas River pump station's pretty fish friendly. The Salmon River in Langley is pretty fish friendly. There's a lot of habitat behind those dikes that would have been there prior to diking. And so the more pump stations that we can fix and make fish friendly, the better we are. Recall that 50% of the Fraser River stocks actually were below Hope, downstream of Hope. So your point is really well taken. All of these dikes, all of these pump stations have an impact, and fixing those has potentially large benefits.
When we look at our recommendations for this, I would be tempted, just to be very provocative about it, to call for a complete ban on new development along the Fraser River, which of course would put some pressure on the municipalities to preserve whatever industrial access remains, because, you know, or would you just purely from the viewpoint of the salmon suggest that it's better to have a bunch of townhouses next to the river than a sawmill?
Well, if you're exchanging a brown field for an even browner field, I guess, you know, it's site specific. And you know, you should be able to negotiate if you're taking a sawmill and turning it into a subdivision, negotiate a riparian area, at least get something out of it. So that should be one of the positive things. Some of the stuff that I've seen, say in Fort Langley, and you're aware of this, the development there by the old sawmill didn't go wide enough in my view. The big thing though is the change from floodland forest to farmland. And these guys keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And so that's the really big thing in terms of development, in my opinion.
Talk about the cumulative impact, because it seems that each development proposal is assessed, but it seems to be assessed on its own merit without much of a shadow cast back to what happened before and what was approved before.
Well, I would say, and there's a little story behind that that's right in your backyard. We found out, and some of the folks that have met with you, and I don't know if you remember, I actually met with you over the Kinder Morgan thing. Some of these guys, under the cover of darkness, got their restrictive covenants removed in the Langley, Surrey area. And so not only were we sort of not holding the line, we were making some great big steps backwards, notwithstanding the fact that some of the local governments are pretty good about this. But yeah, these, you know, the steamroller effect of all the population moving into Lower Mainland it almost seems unresolvable.
Dr. DeChico, we were told by the DFO that the DNA of the PRV that was in the fish farms was different than that which was found in the salmon. Is that the case? Are we dealing with different viruses?
No, we are not. We just been working on a study that is under review right now, and we were able to see that the virus that we find in wild salmon, it jumps basically back and forth between farm salmon and wild salmon.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. Ms. May, I know you notice you have your hand up. Any particular reason?
I was hoping there might be a tiny chance for one more quick question.
There's still time yet. I'll see what we can do as we move along.
Thank you.
We'll now go to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a question for all of the witnesses once again with respect to the department's mission per se, because as it seems to be in crisis, as Mr. Rosno was saying, and this whole scope of the situation, it's difficult to see if it could be settled by the department, or should there be an involvement of other departments to settle the situation of the salmon?
So I guess you used my name, so I'll jump in first. You know, if a violation occurs, a fisheries officer goes out, does an investigation, he then takes it to the FFHPP, Fish and Fish Habitat Protection Program. And those guys have to make a decision with regards to whether a charge or not takes place. On top of that, those guys have what's known as a triage, and they say, that's unlikely to win in court. That's unlikely to be able to be addressed. Okay, we'll pick this one. And so the very notion of a triage says to me that the department is so understaffed with regards to habitat protection and habitat mitigation and resolution that it's easy for me to say that more money and more resources have to go into the agency, but I can't see any other way around it unless more support and capacity is thrown at these really egregious issues.
Ms. Riston?
Perhaps I could just say, in agreeing with Marvin, that this is an opportunity for reconciliation. It's an opportunity to invest in First Nations Guardians programs, to get them involved in not just the monitoring and enforcement end of things, but also in research, to really build capacity in the communities to take care of the resource. So I think this is an important area for government to consider investing in as it considers how to protect wild salmon.
Mr. DeSico, any comment there?
Yeah, well, I can speak for the fish health section. And every time I meet with the Aquaculture Management Division, I hear the great job they do, but also how much they are limited on their work because of the limited staff. And so definitely there would be another aspect that could be taken into consideration if you want to improve that aspect of the issue.
Thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes, please, or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Rosenau, we talked about the critical importance of restoration enhancement, protection, habitat protection, of course, monitoring and science go into the fold as well. Do you believe that this budget is so critical that it's critical that we have a wild salmon recovery budget? I know that the Newtowneth, where I live, they've been looking for funds to help rebuild the habitat and protect habitat, and often they don't get the applications supported because there's so little funds. Do you believe that this budget is absolutely critical?
Well, I guess I don't know the details of the budget, but in a general sense, yes, more needs to be done because we're just sitting here at a crisis situation. And again, I mentioned the passenger pigeon and coho. That already happened 30 years ago, and sockeye have basically disappeared off the map. So yes, I would agree with you.
Right. Ms. Riston, do you want to comment on that as well as the fact that, that obviously there's pesticides going into the water to deal with sea lice? You talk about the impact, not just on, the salmon, but obviously on the other stocks in the ecosystem.
Yes, there's considerable concern about particularly the pesticides and the abundance of shellfish, krill in particular, food for so many parts of the food web, if you will, being impacted with no study whatsoever being done on it. Our concern is also the likelihood that additional chemicals will be brought into the mix, as they've been unable here in BC to control sea lice with the mechanical equipment they brought in since the drugs have failed. The next thing is to move on to the next level of toxic drugs, and there's severe consequences for particularly for shellfish if such drugs are used here on this coast. And again, those haven't been studied either. So I think it's critical that we get a grip on this right away.
Right. Can you speak a little bit too about the fact that the minister hasn't even declared a state of emergency for wild salmon, and then we've got this budget coming up? Can you talk about the importance of this budget and how little money is going into this crisis that we're seeing right now? I know in Newtowneth territories we're seeing runs of salmon dry right up. Like it's a crisis.
I do see a number of areas that I've advocated for investment, and I'll wait to see the budget to see how well I do in that advocacy. But the areas that I've specifically mentioned are research, monitoring, enforcement, building the capacity in the communities to help participate in these things, and getting serious about habitat protection and restoration.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. Very interesting conversation going on right now. I'm going to move over. I didn't get a chance to talk to Mr. Rosenau. Mr. Rosenau, you did mention earlier in the conversation that we had that there are places that you feel where fish farms would be successful without having any or negligible impact on wild salmon stocks. So I'm assuming that you've got some places and destinations where if you were in charge of placing fish farms in and around Vancouver Island and so on, where would those be? Would you be willing to share your thoughts with the committee?
Thank you very much. Well, my view is and I'm not saying this from an oceanographic perspective because tidal currents are so important for maintenance of water quality. But behind Sechelt Peninsula, for example, we've got these long inlets up the coast. We've got long inlets that they have salmon runs, but and this is under the assumption that fish farms do affect migrating salmon. But if you move those farms on an experimental basis, on an adaptive management basis, because I'm sure the industry is not going to allow you to just go holus bolus. Nootka Sound is a really good example. The steelhead have collapsed in Nootka Sound. Huge amounts of farmed fish there. Barkley Sound, very small amounts. Barkley Sound populations are pretty stable. So you'd have to try it as an experimental basis, but I'm sure there are inlets, Burke Inlet or some of the inlets that have modest runs of salmon that you just basically sacrifice.
Interesting perspective. I want to move back over into the freshwater side of things, and especially when it comes to parasites and disease. So I guess we're going to go back to Dr. DeChico. Do we actually face any freshwater or brackish water or estuary water type or is it mostly in the salt water where we experience the parasitic disease issues where migrating salmon are concerned, both for juveniles and or adults?
In our program, we focus primarily in saltwater, but we are able to have other projects where we assess also what happened in freshwater. And yeah, we have definitely parasites that can be taken into account on this. I will mention at the beginning the protozoan that causes white spot disease, Ictiophthirus multifilus. That is very interesting because it seems to, it infects the fish in freshwater, but we see the parasites also in saltwater. So we are starting to think that the effect that agents can have is not only limited to freshwater, but is a carryover effect that also happens in saltwater.
Because it's not always the case, right? I mean, sea lice only stay on in saltwater, and of course, as soon as you hit freshwater, it immediately they drop off. But is there? So we're talking about some of these other things, though, that actually do transcend both through freshwater, all the way through the estuary water into the ocean. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is a freshwater parasites, but we found it also in saltwater. We have also other agents like another parasites, Ceratomyces shasta, that is supposed to be a parasite that infect fish in freshwater, and we found even evidence of lesions in saltwater, which was surprising for us too. So even though every agent have their own preferred environment to thrive, we have also agents that are very flexible and they can impact fish in different type of environments.
So I guess I'll have a question for all three of you. If, and this is a hypothetical question, and I don't want to put anybody in a terribly difficult or awkward position, but I mean, if you had a list of 3 things that you could do, I'm just going to ask you straight up. If the farms were completely removed, would you say, each of you, I'm asking your opinion, that we would see an immediate recovery in the health of salmon stocks in the Fraser and throughout the West Coast? I mean, if we just did that one thing, I understand that there's a multitude of things, but I'm asking you in your opinions, because I'm sure you guys think about this full time. If we were to remove the farms, would you guarantee that would improve the likelihood and for whether it's Chinooks or coho or whatever for these stocks, would they recover through assuming all of the fisheries management, everything else stays the same?
To go first?
Lucky you.
Yeah, well, I would say for starter, it wouldn't hurt because as we have been saying the whole meeting today, I don't feel there is one single smoking gun, but there are a series of effects that adding one to each other definitely make the life of wild fish much more difficult, if not almost impossible. So under the point of view, every little step that we make helps. And
so you would categorize removing fish farms as a little step?
Well, it's a lot of little steps. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Riston? Oh, my time's up, Chair?
Yeah, way over.
But it was a really good question.
I can't say instantaneous, can I?
Yeah, I wouldn't say instantaneous either, that's for sure.
Okay.
There you go. Okay, thank you, Mr. Calkins. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, and I'll put Elizabeth May on notice that she'll get her other question in here in just a second. Mr. Rosano, you were mentioning, enforcement, et cetera, and the DFO officers not bothering to press charges because there is no likelihood of conviction. Do those charges have to be approved by Crown Counsel in BC?
I think they do have to, but under the legislation under the previous government, the changes in the rules, they can actually now give out tickets or force people to remediate without having to go to the courts, and that was laid out to me by one of the fisheries officers just recently. So, yeah, I think there's a mixture there. They normally, for the real big ones, they would have to go through Crown Counsel, I think, but I'm not close enough to the situation to say exactly where any of the cutoffs are.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unrelated issue, but it is a problem, for instance, in the gangs and guns issues that we have at home in Surrey, that, the police can't lay charges. It's one of the few jurisdictions, BC is, where Crown has to approve charges, and that, of course, stops a lot of action from taking place. What do we know about the NAS and the SKINA? And this, I guess, is back to Dr. DeChico, because they're not affected by the kind of development we've seen on the Fraser, and yet there are some runs, particularly chum up there, that are also in distress. Do we know anything about that?
Well, I would say that wasn't directly on the program I've been working on personally. I know there has been a decrease of population over there too, but maybe not as dramatic as other population more in southern BC.
All right. Ms. May, do you want to ask your question now?
Thanks, Ken. You're a hero. But I'm going to go, Marvin, Dr. Rosano, I wanted to, since you raised TMX, so it's kind of a shot in the dark question. How familiar are you at this point with what the construction of TMX may be impacting salmon habitat? I've been particularly concerned, just to frame this, by the fact that the DFO has a memorandum of understanding with the Canadian Energy Regulator, so DFO is not monitoring for impacts on fish habitat.
I knew that intimately. That was sort of my life and breath for about 5 years. I was one of the scientists that worked for the Salmon River Enhancement Society, and we met with Ken Hardy, we met with Terry Beach, and did all sorts of stuff. At the end of the day, my understanding is that we were pushing for trenchless crossings of streams, so riparian vegetation on either bank of the stream, and hardening of the banks is a really serious issue. I had those calculations. It was in the hundreds of thousands of square meters. I don't have it off the top of my head. But the fact that we were basically overruled, and I presented as an evidentiary witness at the National Energy Board in Burnaby 4 or 5 years ago, and it seems to have just been over, just steamrollered over. Part of the issue, of course, is the consultants were able to get away with what they said through the professional reliance model, which is another issue, but still part and parcel of this. It's a big deal in my view, but I think we just lost on that one.
I hate to give up. Thank you.
Yep.
There's still a minute left, Ms. May.
Then in case if I'm not giving up, then what would you, is anyone monitoring what the Canadian Energy Regulator, which used to be the National Energy Board, what kind of capacity do they have? Are they monitoring to protect fish habitat in the construction of TMX?
Well, there is, again, so I've been away from it for about 2 years, but there was monitoring. There was monitoring up to, I think, 5 years, maybe 10 years. We said that the impacts related to the crossings needed to be measured 20 years or longer or continuously. And so we used the Alberta Jasper leg as an example, and that had been done, I don't know, 10 years earlier, and the trees, the mitigation trees, the shrubs were like that big. Most of them died. So, it still was problematic. The companies would say, well, we've basically got this all signed off because we did what government told us to do, but I don't think it was sufficient. It goes back to my earlier talk. Capacity and understanding what constitutes habitat and how to repair it is still a really, really big issue. And it loops back to the Trans Mountain Pipeline project.
If I have one quick one to Karen, no?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. Before I go to Mr. Zimmer for 5 minutes or less, Mr. Calkins, you got your hand raised?
Just wanted to extend an invite to Mr. Rosenau. If he looks at my profile picture on here, there's probably a couple dozen pipelines that go right underneath that river that I'm holding that beautiful cutthroat trout in. I'll be happy to show him where pipelines and rivers can meet up and do no harm.
Okay, no problem. Mr. Zimmer, over to you for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to our witnesses and everybody. It's been very informative, I think, to most of us. One thing that I'll just make a comment about, it's been talked about climate change in this conversation a bit, and it was a conversation I had with Brian Riddell, again, former, not former expert, he's still an expert on our salmon in BC, but talked to me about the effects of climate change to the fish populations. Specifically BC salmon and the reality of that. And when I asked him the question, what do we do to fix this? And I said, not the climate change issue, but fix the salmon problem in BC. I was asking about fish specifically. And, it's not something we can just sort of wave a magic wand and 2 sentences later it's fixed. Again, I think it goes back to what Dr. Rosenau talked about more of a commission type of a larger plan that looks over the long term. But what I wanted to ask while I still have some time, I wanted to talk to Dr. DeCicco, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. We talked about fish farms and the like, and you talked about the negative effects in your opening statement. I've spoken with the ambassador to Norway as one country that does aquaculture, because I was looking into it. There's got to be a country that's doing this in a way that's having its a less of an impact to our wild stocks potentially. Can you? And I don't want to presume that you have this knowledge of aquaculture around the world, but are there countries around the world that do aquaculture well? And if they do, what are the differences? What are some of the key differences that they do and do it successfully?
Well, one way to approach this is, for example, Chile. I'm not sure they do it well, but definitely has a different impacts than what we have in BC, because they don't have wild fish. So in that case, it's easier. And I know even on a public opinion perspective, aquaculture is received in a better way than in Norway, in Europe in general, and in BC. I would say the aquaculture operation have improved over the last few years, like the last 10 or 20 years. They're definitely better than what it was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. But there is a difference between being better and being sustainable. And I don't think we're there yet.
Thank you. Dr. Rosenau, getting to you, just based on the same question that I asked Dr. DeCicco, are there, and you had this question just before you ran out of time, I guess, what's a better ideal situation for aquaculture in BC? Are there nations around the world that do aquaculture better? And if so, what do they do? What do they do differently from Canada that we could maybe learn from?
I'm not aware of any. Certainly, I'm not exhaustive, but I keep in touch with the literature, and it seems that wherever you have anadromous salmon or trout runs, there's always an impact. That's the sense that I get. Chile doesn't have anadromous salmon runs that are natural. In fact, these are escapees that now run into the rivers from the fish farms. Eventually, they've naturalized. So I cannot come up with any positive answer for you.
Okay, thank you for that. The conversation I did have with the Norwegian ambassador to Canada about this is some of their, what he told me, what they were, the aquaculture industry, I guess, started similarly 40 years ago. This is what I've heard anyway, but have had this constant always of advancing their technology, and they're looking at putting these pens further out into the water and deeper waters, so the effects of the food falling through the nets and that are less impactful, I guess. So to me, it would be something that we should probably look at as a nation, is to see if there's better countries doing this and what are they doing, and then obviously implement that in our country. Just one last comment, and maybe Dr. Rosenau, because we talked about a similar friend of ours, Dean Work. One thing that I'm concerned about in some of these actions of the minister is, the effects on those people that are actually the environmental stewards on the water. Dean is one of them. He's the one that actually is out there. I was with him. We were doing some sturgeon research on the water and being part of that program. It's been a very successful program. That's why we still have sturgeon today. Sturgeon there that's older than Confederation, some of them. That's how old they are, as you know. What can we do to better support that environmental steward? The one that's going out there, they might fish with a fishing rod during the week, but out on the weekend, they're picking up garbage along the stream, or they're helping remediate streams and restore that habitat that we just talked about that's been lost in some cases. How do we better help that volunteer to do more of that? Because to me, it seems like it would be a great investment. Any thoughts there?
Well, I work quite closely with one of my former students who is a community advisor. He's a DFO employee now, and he connects with these local stewardship groups. A lot of them are running kind of shoestring operations. We closed down the Vedder River gravel removal, which was a nonsensical thing for flood protection by the city of Chilliwack this last summer. I probably spent 2 weeks analyzing the data, and when we presented the data to the agencies, including DFO, they said, wow, you know that stuff way better than we do. And eventually it was so embarrassing they pulled it. So what I would say, one of the things that stewardship groups can benefit from probably is some funding, but the other thing is going back and giving capacity to your own line staff, opening back up those offices, and those feet on the ground are really super important. Those are the people that I teach in my classes, support feet on the ground, and they can interact with the local stewardship groups.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for
Chair.
that.
Thank
gone,
you for the
gone
time.
way over. Mr. Hardy, for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Dr. DeCiccio, you mentioned earlier that the situation with the plankton out in the deep ocean was also affecting shrimp. The other thing, of course, that salmon eat are herring, and we've seen some stress on herring stocks as well. What's going on there?
Well, I mean, herrings feed on shrimp, so the chain is there. Well, we just finished the spawning herring season right now, and definitely fishing for those herrings is not helpful in trying to rebuild the stock. That's definitely one thing to keep into consideration. And environmental conditions don't help these fish to feed and proliferate, thrive either. So there are quite a few factors that should be taken into account why herrings are not doing great in the Pacific Ocean.
Is there anything that we can do anything about?
Well, as I said, avoiding to fish for them or regulate that in a way that we preserve the stock that we have, that will help, and that's something that that's an anthropogenic level on that. As I say, it's tough to regulate the temperature of the ocean, but it's easier, definitely easier to regulate how many of them we catch for our purposes.
Dr. Rosenau, and I'm sorry, I was calling you Mr. Rosenau, but I will give you your proper title. When we were discussing basically the fix for the big bar slide, we got into quite a discussion about hatcheries and their impact on the wild salmon stocks. And there was a good discussion about a proper strategy toward hatcheries, particularly up country, up both the Thompson and the Fraser systems. What have you got to say about how hatcheries actually should be employed, to rebuild salmon stocks?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I guess I'm not a fan of hatcheries, and a lot of my mortgage was paid for by my former partner who was a hatchery manager. So, I can't, and a lot of my students get jobs in both federal and provincial hatcheries. But I think hatcheries need to be you have to be very, very careful about them. I think, in going back to what I would like to have said in one of the earlier questions, is take the fish farms out. I think you would have an instantaneous response, and the need for hatcheries would almost be non-existent. Okay, I think the response would be that crucial. Now, in the case of Big Bar, when you have the potential of losing the last genetic material, hatcheries sometimes are very important from a conservation perspective. Up in the Chaco, where I've worked on in a federal court case with Rio Tinto flows and stuff like that, without the sturgeon hatchery, that population would probably collapse to extinction. So there's these weird balances. There's sort of yes, hatcheries are great. No, hatcheries should never be used, but you have to be really careful about it, in my opinion. And particularly in the interior stocks, yeah, you may have to do it if Big Bar isn't completely rectified.
Is there, sort of deep ocean conflict between hatchery fish and wild fish?
I would say that the science, some of the stuff out of BCI, SFU, gotta get my institution here right. Randall Peterman suggests, there's competition. The Alaskans, again, putting out, jillions of pink salmon affect chum salmon, which also overlap in terms of feeding. So out in the open ocean, there can be potential impacts, but that's something that I think scientists haven't really figured out to that detail yet.
I'm not sure who to ask this question of, so if anybody has the answer, just put your hands up or launch in. There has been some discussion about a marked selective fishery, because we're told that there are times when the ocean is teeming with hatchery fish, especially from Washington State, and some people see this as an opportunity, for the recreational industry to, get those lodges up again, get people catching and keeping some fish, etc. A marked selective fishery. What do you think of that? Okay.
I guess I'm the hardcore angler here. I spend more time chasing Chinooks than probably anybody in this whole meeting. So, again, there are potential negative impacts from a genetic perspective. What I would say, though, is that if you're going to have a fishery, every single Chinook, every single coho should be marked, and there should be very clear discrimination. The problem with hatcheries, again, is that they are sort of the crack cocaine of the fisheries world. You get addicted to them really easily, and you can end up with problems associated with weak stock harvest, which Carl Walters and all the UBC guys went through 30 or 40 years ago, and it's just a kind of a known thing.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. We'll now go to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. One last question with respect to what you can observe abroad in other countries. What are their good practices, their exemplary practices that they use that could be of help to us? This is to any of the witnesses who would like to answer.
If I may begin, at least, I looked at practices in several jurisdictions just this past year when we were sitting as the Enhanced Sustainability and Aquaculture Initiative. I can't say that there is a jurisdiction that I would point to and say, this is model, this is being done well. And I think that is because this industry got out far ahead of any government's regulation of it. It was big and impactful before anyone understood what the impacts would be. And so every jurisdiction has had to play catch up with it in terms of trying to regulate it. Some of the catch up measures are working better than others. Norway stands out as a great example there in that they have substantially curbed the growth of the industry in the water, except if the industry can adhere to environmental standards. So control the lice, control the spread of disease. These tenures in Norway are completely differently handled from the way we handle them here. I'm not sure we can take a direct lesson from them, but certainly one of the things that stands out is they charge an awful lot more for the right to use the ocean. This is something that we could employ as a technique to incent salmon farmers to stop using the ocean as a sewer and move into closed containment. This is something else that Norway is incenting, is the development of new technologies, including land-based closed containment. Someone asked a question earlier indicating that these developments were prohibitive, and I must say they are not prohibitive. There are over 70 projects that have been announced worldwide in land-based closed containment. It's expected that they'll produce over 1 million metric tons of salmon within the coming decade. They're underway. There are several of them that are underway, under construction right now, and at least 3 that I'm aware of that are in production right now. They're selling their fish already. These are not prohibitive. They're attracting billions of dollars of investment worldwide, and they could be attracted here as well because we have all the advantages that we require to develop a land-based salmon farming industry.
Thank you, Madam Gill. We'll now finish off with Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. DeChico, it came up, Pacific herring was just raised, and do you believe that the current DFO management regime is applying the precautionary principle in terms of, managing the herring fishery, especially in the Salish Sea? Because we all know the importance of that fishery and the interconnectedness it has, whether it be for cod or salmon or whales, other mammals and marine life. Can you speak about how confident you are that they're applying the precautionary principle?
Well, allowing the fishery as it is right now over, as it just happened, I don't think there was a very precautious move. As I said, we have a very limited stock and every fish count that applies to the prey and that applies to the predator. So I wouldn't say I agree that they are applying the precautionary approach right now.
Do you think the 20% measurement that they use for the biomass harvest rate, do you think that's sustainable, or what rate would you recommend?
I mean, that's a much more complex question. I think it also varies year by year. You cannot use a measure that is valid every year. Every year we have a different productivity, so we cannot use the value every year the same.
Can you speak about, like, if there's an overharvest, the impact that can have on future generations of the species?
If you have overharvest, that applies to every species. You definitely impact the survival of the species. So some year might be better, some year might be worse. But every time you go worse, you really have a huge impact on those populations.
Ms. Worson, Mr. Calkins asked a question about the impact of salmon farms, especially I'm thinking about in Clayoquot Sound, where we've got a high concentration of farms, low returns of wild salmon, these in the Newfoundland territory, really overall, but specifically near those river mouths of the existing farms. How important is it to remove salmon farms especially in areas where you've got low returns and they're having an impact?
Well, I think it's critical. I mean, if you look at Clayoquot Sound, there is no habitat reason why those returns shouldn't be brilliant. The habitat is in terrific shape for almost all of the rivers in Clayoquot Sound. So why the impacts? Well, monitoring for sea lice, for example, in Clayoquot Sound has shown that the impacts to the wild salmon have been huge in, the last 3 years. So removing the farms would remove a threat that it's responsible for perhaps as much as 94% mortality in some of those tiny outmigrating runs. They're down to tens of fish in some of the rivers. There's nothing left to play with or to gamble with in terms of leaving those farms in place.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johns. That closes up our session for today. I want to say a big thank you, of course, to our witnesses for their insightful testimony here today. And we'll say thank you to our committee members. And I see Mr. Arnold has his hand up. I don't know if that's intentional or not.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wondered if I could do a 10-second question here. I'd like to ask Ms. Riston if she could repeat.
Actually, Mr. Arnold, if I do that for you. The time has expired. I'm gone over time. I think with the permission of the committee, I'll allow it if it's just for clarification purposes of an answer.
I think it's just a clarification thing, yeah.
It is for clarification. I just would ask if she could repeat for the record the date that Dr. Miller-Saunders provided Minister Jordan with the data related to the mouth rot bacteria.
On December 15th, Dr. Miller sent it to her immediate supervisor. As I said, I don't know that it ever got to the minister.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Janju, with your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to ask Mr. Chair if we can ensure that we have some time allotted in the next meeting for, committee business. I've got a motion I'd like to table at that meeting.
Okay, actually, so far we will be doing committee business to some extent at the next meeting. I guess it'll be version 2 of the moderate livelihood study. So if it's relevant here, or if we get time for, we'll certainly try. Madam Gill, you have your hand up. You're on mute.
Same thing as Mr. Johns. Oh, it's been a difficult day. I'd like to table some motions as well then, Mr. Chair.
Understood. I'll do my best to carve off a little bit of time for committee business. Again, thank you to everyone, committee members, and nice to see some familiar faces back, Mr. Zimmer and Ms. May. Always a pleasure. Thank you to our clerks and our analysts, and of course the very important translators that make us possible for us to hear this in both official languages. Thank you to all. We'll see you at the next committee meeting. Adjourned.